What's going on, guys? I'm Chris and this is Regular Guy Training. Today we're going to talk about training a lot. We're going to talk about a lot of ways to improve that training, and we're going to talk about different methodologies. However, if you're looking to come out and do some training with us, you should know that we have a lot of classes open all over in places like Eastman, Georgia, Picayune, Mississippi, Fitzpatrick, Alabama, Lebanon, Pennsylvania, Drakesboro, Kentucky, and others, including not just our rifle and our pistol sets, but specialty classes like our dedicated AK class, our night vision class, which is sold out at the moment, and our vehicle defense class. All of this is available on the website to peruse. And by the way, if you want a cheaper way to go through it, simply going to the link in the description below for the Patreon site will direct you toward our Patreon page. And by the way, for guys that decide to use $41 a month as a plan, have access to all of this training except for the vehicle class for nothing more than being enrolled in that $41 a month plan. It's a real easy way to get repeated training without getting absolutely killed financially. And if you do a little bit of math and then look at the full pricers for a lot of this, you can tell that I put it up as a way to get guys to come back to us over and over again without enormous hassle. It's something I would have killed for back in the day, so take advantage of it. But now let's move on to today's subject. See, this review is a little interesting to me, mostly because not only was I pleasantly surprised and got exponentially more excited as time went on, but what I also realized is this is not just something convenient to have or something that's kind of neat for a niche purpose. What this turned into instead for me is something that is absolutely required for anyone that plans on doing well with their handgun, regardless of what type of training that you actually do. Now, there's a lot of fluff and hubbub surrounding this thing, and believe me, we will get to all that. But like all things, if you use this properly, and if you apply a focused training regimen around it, it's actually really hard to be bad with a handgun once you've included this as a part of your regular training regimen. All right, so when we pick one of these guys up and we actually compare it to what it's supposed to be, or what it's supposed to model, this is essentially a Glock 19 in dimensions, right? As far as grip size, as far as how the gun feels when you pick it up and put a grip on it, it is very much a Glock 19. And I don't mean that in that it closely simulates it or whatever. No, you have these dimensions. This is a big deal, at least to me, because if I pick something up that's for a trainer and I want to put it in a regular Glock holster or the holster that I use for concealed or the ALS that I have or whatever, and it doesn't have those dimensions, that's a big problem for me. So let's use that as a segue to go straight into the reliability and ammunition used and all that as far as the gun is concerned. I have heard quite a lot of reliability problems coming out of these guns, especially when they were early. Things like polymer mixing problems and stuff coming apart were not an uncommon thing to hear when this model handgun was brand new. But at least as of this handgun's production, and that's roughly 3 years ago, I've basically seen no problems out of anyone that decided to bring them to class. So whatever the issues were as far as the chemical mixes for a polymer and all that are concerned, they seem to be sorted out. The other stuff that turned up as issues for this handgun, I believe, frankly, is user error. This is a very heavily spring 22, as far as 22 long rifle auto-loading pistols are concerned, which, at least to me, that automatically screams that this thing needs higher velocity ammo to run it. Again, I've heard quite a number of issues with people trying to sling ammunition that was literally cheaper than fertilized dirt, and complaining about the reliability of the handgun as a result. But in my personal experience with this, and having watched quite a few other students use them, it seems that 1,200 feet per second or more is what is just going to work with this handgun. Take this specific handgun for example. The first time that I saw it, a student was using it and ran through a 4-day class of 2,800 rounds using exclusively it throughout that class. He was using plated round-nose CCI mini-mag for all 4 days, and as an oh by the way, it rained very heavily on us out in Mississippi. And even after filling empty magazines up with so much mud that we had to get a water bowl available for him to swish the things out with, he didn't really run into any real striking issues as far as that was concerned. And after he decided to loan it to me for this review, I decided that I was going to shoot it a lot, not clean it the entire time, lube it before each range trip and see how far it would go before it eventually stopped. And after 5,000 rounds of CCI Mini-Mag round nose and over 6,000 rounds of Remington Golden Bullet jacketed hollow points, air quotes on the hollow point part, I'm happy to say that in over 11,000 rounds, and the reason why I say over and not put a definitive number on it is the bulk price for Golden Bullet, I don't actually remember what the change over extra, like I believe it to be like 6,200 and something, but I can't put a definitive number on that, so I'm gonna just say 6,000. The point is that after, for sure, 11,000 rounds without a cleaning and simply relubing the thing over and over, I'm actually quite happy to say that in all of that time and all those rounds fired without a cleaning, the thing had a grand total of 23 stoppages throughout that entire experience. Now, I can't really pin down what stoppages these were, as they were a mix of things: failure to fire, failure to eject, failure to feed, just honestly fairly normal pistol stuff if it's shot in high volume. But think about that for a second. If you do the math, 23 stoppages in over 11,000 rounds is 1,000% as far as failure rate is concerned. And all of this really has to do with one thing. We ran ammo that was spec'd for it. It's simple. Now granted, this took quite a bit of time because all I had was 6 single-stack 10-shot magazines that were essentially made by Glock. And I know certain people have a problem with that. We'll get to that later. But even if that took a while, we had 11,000 reps of whatever it is that we needed with barely any issues out of it whatsoever. Funny thing about that is I know I've cycled quite a bit of trash house 9mm ammo through my Glock 19s, and it had less of a failure rate than my 19 does. Now granted, with every handgun ever, if you feed it real trash house ammunition, it's gonna just not work for you. And many people know what I'm talking about because many people have bought surplus Uzi machine gun ammunition from Israel or someplace thinking, wow, that is really just not expensive at all, figuring out that those primers are real hard and that it's not gonna cycle in any of your handguns. Also, I'm sure that plenty of us have shot Winchester Reforged, and that stuff is just trash ammunition. And I don't think I've ever met a living, breathing human in person that didn't have problems with lax ammunition either, because their quality control is in the name. So really that just kind of says one thing about the ammunition type or the reliability of this little 22, and that is feed it the correct ammunition and it will run. Now, I'm certain that there are 22 folks out there that will sit there and say, oh, that's Gucci or that's expensive ammunition or whatever. But if I can get a brick of over 6,000 rounds delivered to me for the same price roundabout, and in some cases just a little bit more expensive, like $20 more expensive than bulk 9mm, I don't really have a problem with that. In addition, you have these same people saying over and over and over again that the Glock 44 doesn't shoot point of impact with the sights. Well, maybe the problem is that it has a polygonal rifle barrel and you're sending not just really bad ammunition through it, but non-plated ammunition too. Most people will tell you that if you try that in a regular 9mm handgun and try to shoot lead cast bullets or non-plated ammunition of whatever variety, you're gonna have point of impact problems. And the cool part is that after all these rounds fired and wondering whether or not it's gouging out metal or anything like that, once I finally started to clean this thing up, I noticed really fast that, this thing really isn't beating itself apart, like, at all. It's very normal looking wear for a well-built handgun that's shot a lot. And as far as the single-stack 10-shot magazines are concerned, I'm pretty sure that Glock went with that just because they know that auto-loading 22s in general do have reliability problems. So sticking with what's safe and what is more likely to work for longer is just going to reduce the number of problems that you would have. And frankly, I side with them on that. Because anyone that's built a double-stack magazine for this particular gun is someone like ProMag, and those magazines have always been terrible. So now that we've covered reliability, let's actually talk about training, because a lot of people don't really know, and I don't blame them, how to actually integrate a 22 long rifle handgun into their 9mm training. So in order to talk about that, we should probably talk about this too. One standout characteristic that this gun absolutely has is the fact that it is under a pound loaded. Now, considering that a loaded 9mm Glock 19 is significantly heavier than this could lead some into the arena that makes this feel like it's a toy, which I get because that's sort of how I felt at the same time. And then when you start shooting a thing, you notice something really fast. That weight, as far as your training goes, actually helps you out quite a lot, so let me explain myself. If you have a handgun that's under a pound loaded, but then you stick a Glock trigger in it. For instance, the difference between this and a stock Glock trigger really is that there's an apex connector in it, and all that does is just lighten things up just a little. But really, that's it. And a lot of times what a lot of people don't realize is that with a Glock 19, for instance, even if the trigger's been lightened up some, you still have a trigger that's significantly heavier than the handgun you're shooting. This applies even more to the 22 because the smallest negative input on the gun will drive it off target. So whether you got bad habits coded into your brain, or you just placed a bad shot or influenced it a little bit too much, you're gonna notice, especially once you start shooting the thing a lot. Which is also funny because there's also a lot of people that say, in conjunction with the fact that they're using the wrong type of ammunition for it, they're continuing to say that it doesn't shoot POI the same as the POA. And fact is, it's really easy to be deceived into thinking that it does that, because if you throw in the slightest amount of incorrect movement on the gun, it's gonna go there. Whether you got an inconsistency in your grip or leveraging that trigger shoe a little too much, you're gonna move the gun. And in cases like trying to shoot steel plates out to 50 yards with it, instantly and easily, you can throw the gun completely off target without even noticing it at first. So how this works for you is actually rather obvious as far as your individual discipline and training is concerned. You must be significantly more precise in how you manipulate your trigger. And yes, this absolutely transfers itself to 9mm handguns, especially seeing as you're using the same triggers. And this isn't just important for shooting the gun further away either. What's really important to see is how you start manipulating the gun while you're trying to shoot faster too. Because the felt recoil is so low, and because the trigger you're using is still the same as your carry gun, it was really easy for me to individually feel how I was manipulating the gun through the trigger shoe. And as time went on, and as I started to integrate 9mm into an actual training regiment with it, you notice that you're doing the same things if you iron it out or not with the regular 9mm handgun. Never mind the fact that cheaper ammunition means more reps, and more reps means that if you structure things just right, you're absolutely going to get extreme value out of something like this. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about structure and that kind of stuff, and let's see if we can head things off, because I know that comments are going to show up in the comments section about, well, if I shoot too much 22, I'll be overpowered by my 9mm, which is a concern that you should have. But let's go ahead and talk about how we can avoid all that. So to my student base, I advocate that they do 100 rounds a week of pick a thing. Whatever their carry gun is, get 100 rounds of target ammunition for that, and focus on an individual skill per week. But what this does is that it opens up your options significantly when we start talking about the value of the individual ammunition. So, like I said, with Remington Golden Bullet, the stuff that goes 1,200 feet per second, and that you can get in bulk from pretty much anywhere, what I advocate for is roughly a 5-to-1 approach. Now, granted, if you buy Remington Golden Bullet online, they come in bricks of just over 6,000, which does help you out a little bit on the latter half of this, but still the ratios can remain the same. Or if you want it to work out equally per case of 9mm, you can up this to 6-to-1. Point is generally this is how I have started this out, and it has actually improved me significantly since. So what you do is you still bring that 100 rounds of 9mm out to that range session. You also bring 500 or 600 rounds of that 22 long rifle ammo at the same time. And let's just say for demonstrative purposes, right, the CCI Mini Mag you'd be using 500 of because it's a little more expensive and it ships in bricks of 5,000. And for the Remington Golden Bullet, you can bring 600 of because of, I've already described it, they ship in bricks of just over 6,000. So what you do is you lead off your day with round about 20 rounds of 9mm, just so that you know where you're at, you can get a little warmed up, And then from there, you change your light over and get your magazine set up to run 500 or 600 rounds of that 22 long rifle. Now, you can work on a great number of skills here, but what really works for me, at least anyway, as far as joining up all the connective tissue stuff, is working on things like your draw time, placement of individual shots on small targets, extending ranges so that you can get your focus together on a plate that's at 50 yards, which you may have to do with a handgun, depending on your circumstance, or if you just want to increase the difficulty. Point is that whatever you would practice generally with your 9mm handgun, double that distance with the 22, so that you can essentially negate the advantage of the recoil being softer and magnify the fact that it's lightweight being a problem for your trigger discipline. Side note to this, I wouldn't add a red dot to these guns. These slides are very, very light, and I'm really cautious to disturb the timing of the system to such a point where I didn't even try it, and frankly, okay, bunch of iron sight time just makes my dotted time better, because the dot is just faster regardless to who says what nonsense revolving around it. So essentially, with an iron sight super light gun that will just go wherever you influence it easily, this essentially engages hard mode at these extended distances. And now you can do things that people generally do not. You can put a whole lot of time on your one-handed shooting, because no one does that well. You can shoot with your non-dominant side more, because again, no one does that well. You can spend a lot of time figuring out exactly how you manipulate a handgun while shooting it faster, because again, no one does that well, and even if they do, they don't pay attention to what they're doing other than, look at the holes over there. But for me, the practice that I put in is usually at more extended distances, requiring more precise shooting, and I try to get it done as efficiently as possible. So if I'm supposed to be able to draw and fire a handgun and get a great heart box hit at 15 or 10 yards, I better be able to do it at 50. And frankly, I can't really describe how much harder that is with this handgun other than saying, go do it and go get your lunch money took by it. Because nobody has had their confidence dragged through the mud like that until they go try it with a 22 and go get wrecked for a few hours. In addition to this, I'll also spend extended strings trying to shoot things at these extended distances, because a lot of people don't really notice how fast their focus wanes at just trying to do something as simple as hit a target at 50 over and over and over again for 60 rounds until they try and do it. In addition to this, I try to get as much time as possible on my one-handed stuff, whether it be doing reloads while doing regular strings of fire, shooting with the non-dominant side, or trying to keep the gun as flat as humanly possible while trying to hit things at extended distances, which again is a whole lot harder than it sounds. And once I've gone through 500 or 600 rounds of that, now I can take the remaining 80 rounds of 9mm and go to work with that. Now, if I've done a whole bunch of being precise, now I can work on trying to speed up or shoot faster cadences with the 9mm stuff. Something that frankly feels like a waste of time most of the time if all you had that entire time was 100 rounds of 9mm. There's too much more difficult stuff to address if that's all you worked on. And generally speaking, the amount of time that it takes you to get used to that 9mm handgun will simply reduce itself over time, but generally speaking, between 4 to 6 rounds, I'm used to 9mm again, and I make sure that I'm ending on 9mm so I don't get too used to the 22. And based off the video that you're seeing today, there's a few strings that'll run out about 40 rounds of that, and then I spend 40 rounds on a gauge. For those that don't know what a gauge is, come out to class. It's a great tool to figure out exactly where you're at, and it's a great way to quantifiably tell if you're improving. It's also something that can get significantly more difficult if you know what you're doing. But at the end here, when I'm doing the gauge on these last 40 rounds, I have a really good idea of where I currently stand, and at the end of it all, I have 600 or 700 total reps on the week, rather than simply 100. And that obviously is a lot more work, and if you do it just right, it's real hard to be bad. And for those in the know, this particular target, I didn't have USPSA cardboard, so I just decided, okay, I'm gonna use the really fat lines to where if I touch them, it's the scoring system that penalizes me more rather than less. And I decided that, okay, well, anything outside of the chest zone is a 3. The head itself is the only 1 that I have, so that anything outside of that is a greater penalty, and the super fat line in there was gonna absolutely screw me over, as you see it does. And even with all those measures in place, all the 3s added up and the 2 1s that I got, because there were a couple of neck liners in there, that still ended up a 162 out of 200. I'm fairly happy with that, especially considering that I didn't have a target that I would normally use for it. But going off of that a little bit, this is also something that I achieved during a day that's a little bit colder, and the wind didn't go away the entire time. It's not hard to see, I'm a thin guy. Cold air, especially windy cold air, whips my little ass. So not taking a massive performance hit because of that as a result is simply an indicator of how many reps I was able to get that day. So frankly, with all these things added up and with all these things to consider, it's just a way that's easier to stay and keep sharp. So even with all of these things in consideration, this isn't just a way to stay sharp, this is a way to simply improve, even if the majority of those reps are coming from a caliber you'd never carry. So over time, the one thing that I've absolutely learned about the Glock 44 is that this isn't just something that's kind of neat to have or is kind of cool as far as just being an anti-squirrel machine. To me, anyone that takes this seriously and then approaches their training in that manner, in conjunction with your at-home dry fire practice and whatever system you use for that, something like this that isn't just used to turn dirt makes it actually extremely difficult to be bad with over time. Because if you seek a method to improve your skills and take it seriously the entire time, there really isn't a better 9mm live fire simulator than this. Because all the controls are actually the same. The gun behaves very, very closely to a regular Glock 19. And because of its weight, in some cases it's harder to shoot straight with it than it is a regular 9mm handgun. And this is dependent on certain circumstances, but that one's not hard to figure out. So, all that said, I recommend it. I couldn't recommend it more. And frankly, if you take your individual self-defense preparation seriously, I view it as absolutely required equipment at this point. So, with that said, guys, remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy. It's really not my fault you suck.